The woman is burying her cows alive. That is what they say in Hardin, Montana, in the autumn of 1898, when Marta Vasarhelyi drags her 2 milk cows and her 4 remaining sheep down a ramp of frozen earth into a hole in the ground and pulls a grass-sodded roof over their heads. She is 31 years old, broad-shouldered, with hands that have known 3 kinds of cold: the cold of a Budapest winter, the cold of an Atlantic crossing, and now this, the killing cold of the Bighorn Basin, which is a different creature entirely. Her English is accented and precise, the way a person speaks when they have fought. For every word, her husband Ferenc is 8 months in the churchyard, taken by a kick from a startled horse in February, and everything they built together. The small cattle operation, the hope of a real homestead, now rests entirely on her hands, on what she knows. And what she knows, the neighbors cannot begin to fathom. Old Bergstrom leans on his fence post and watches her haul timbers down into the earth. He has been in Montana for 19 years and considers himself an authority on surviving its winters. He cups his hands around his mouth and shouts across the gray field, "Mrs. Vasarhelyi, you cannot keep animals in a pit. They will rot, they will drown when the snowmelt comes." He shakes his head and mutters to his wife, who has come out onto their porch to watch. The woman is touched. Ferenc's death broke something in her. Marta hears him. She keeps hauling timber. The Callaway brothers, who farm 2 sections to the east, ride past on their way to town and pull up their horses at the sight of her. The younger one, Deke, leans down from his saddle with a grin that is not kind. "You building yourself an ark, ma'am? 'Cause I got news. There ain't no flood coming, just winter, lots and lots of winter." His brother laughs and they ride on, and their laughter carries back to her on the cold October wind, even past her. Hugh's a gentle man who means well, stops to offer quiet counsel one Sunday after service. He takes her hand in both of his and speaks carefully, the way a person speaks to someone they fear is not thinking clearly. "Marta, the community is worried. Perhaps we might find a family to take the animals through the winter. There are those who would help." He means, "You are going to fail." He means, "Stop before you embarrass yourself further." Marta looks at him with those dark, steady eyes. "Thank you, Pastor." She says, "I will not need help." She is wrong about that. She will need one person's help, but she does not know it yet, and the help will come from a direction no one expects. What Marta knows, and what no one in Hardin has the frame of reference to understand, is this. In the Carpathian villages, where she grew up, where her grandfather kept animals through winters that could freeze a man's breath before it left his mouth, they did not fight the cold, they went beneath it. The old farmers of her grandmother's valley had been building underground animal shelters, what they called in the old tongue a verum istallo, a pit stable, for 3 centuries before Marta was born. The principle was simple, though its execution was not below 4 feet. Even in the cruelest winter, the earth maintains a temperature that will not kill. The ground itself is a furnace banked low and slow, running on the heat of the planet's core and the stored warmth of every summer that has ever been. You do not heat the building against the cold. You let the earth refuse the cold on your behalf. But Marta knows something else too. She knows this winter is going to be different. She has watched the animals since August, the way the squirrels have been frantic, caching food in quantities she has never seen, the way the cattle grew their winter coats 3 weeks early, dense and deep, as if their bodies were reading a message in the air that human senses cannot detect. She has felt it in the ache of the old break in her left wrist, the one she suffered as a girl, a deep grinding cold that settles in bone before it settles in air. She has no language for it that the neighbors would accept as science, but she has been right before twice in her life, and she will not bet her animals, her livelihood, and her children's survival against a feeling she trusts, because that is what this is too. Children asleep in the cabin, Sabit 9 and little Imre 6, whose father is in the ground, whose future is those cows and those sheep. If the animals die this winter, the Vasarhelyi homestead dies with them. The bank in Billings already has its eye on the property. Marta is 5 months behind on a note of $230. The debt Ferenc took on to buy the seed and the breeding bull. They lost to the same accident that killed him. She has $44 in a tin beneath the floorboard. She has a neighbor's mockery. She has 2 hands, a child's memory of her grandfather's voice, and the particular ferocity of a woman who has run out of alternatives. She begins in the 2nd week of October, before the deep freeze sets in. The site she chooses is on the south-facing slope of the small rise behind her cabin, a crucial decision, though she would not know the scientific word for why until many years later. A south-facing slope means the winter sun low and weak as it strikes the ground at its most direct angle. For these latitudes, it means the snowpack above the shelter absorbs and releases a few degrees more than flat ground. It means the drainage runs away from rather than toward the pit. She has thought about this. She has thought about almost nothing else. Since March she digs first with the iron spade, breaking through the frozen crust. The top 8 inches are concrete hard, and she spends 2 full days just getting through them, her breath coming in white clouds, her shoulders burning below the frost line. The earth becomes workable dark and slightly moist, and here she makes real progress. She is digging a rectangle 40 feet long, 16 feet wide, 7 feet deep. The measurements are not arbitrary. She has paced them out from memory, recalling the dimensions of her grandfather's pit stable, scaling them to the number of animals she needs to shelter, and adding room for the feed she will store inside the excavated earth. She does not waste. She mounds it in a horseshoe around 3 sides of the pit, the north, east and west, packing it into earthen berms that will add 4 additional feet of insulation to those walls. The south side she leaves open for the entrance ramp. A neighbor watching from a distance might think she is building a fortification. They are not entirely wrong. The timber work begins in the 3rd week. She has salvaged every board from the old secondary barn that collapsed in the spring. Thor's 16-foot lengths of rough-cut pine, weathered but sound. She has traded 2 months of sewing work to the Hoffman family for a second load of timber squared logs she stacks as the wall. Framing, the construction method she uses, is one she watched her grandfather perform 40 feet below the village streets of Egger. She sets vertical posts at 6-foot intervals along the interior perimeter, notching them to receive horizontal stringers, then face-sheathing them with the rough-cut pine to create a double wall. The gap between the outer earthen wall and the inner timber wall is 6 inches, and into this gap she will pack, when she is ready, a material the neighbors find most baffling of all: grass, dried grass. Cut in September from the low meadow by the creek, she has a stack of it 12 feet high, covered with old canvas, compressed into tight bundles and stacked between the timber walls of her pit barn. Borgström actually climbs down to look at it one afternoon when Marta is working at the far end of the structure. He pokes at the bundled grass, turns a bundle over in his thick hands, and his expression shifts through confusion into something approaching pity. She's insulating with hay, he tells his wife, that evening, like she thinks it's a dugout soddy, but with animals in it. In that wet, it'll rot mold. She'll choke her own cows. He is wrong about the rot. The grass is dried, not green. It will not mold if the moisture is managed, and managing moisture is the 3rd thing Marta has planned for, though it is the hardest. The floor of the pit she does not leave as bare earth into the floor. She digs a secondary drainage channel 18 inches wide and a foot deep, running along the center of the space from the deep end to the entrance ramp, where it exits through a buried clay tile pipe she has salvaged from the ruins of a failed irrigation project on the abandoned Krebs homestead. To the north she lines this channel with flat stones from the creek bed, carried by hand in a canvas sack, 2 loads a day for 10 days, 47 stones. She will count them later. Each one she fits as tightly as she can. A dry-laid stone drain that will carry urine and liquid waste away from the animals and away from the foundations above the drainage channel. The floor itself she packs with a mix she learned from watching her grandfather. 2 parts clay subsoil to 1 part coarse sand, to 1 part fine gravel compacted in layers, until it is nearly as hard as the frozen crust above this earthen floor will not turn to mud under the animal's hooves. It will breathe, it will give, and, in the profound cold of January, it will hold just barely above the freezing point. Because below ground, even in Montana, the earth does not freeze past a certain depth. The roof is where Marta's engineering shows most completely, and where the neighbor's mockery grows loudest. She builds a double roof. The first layer is a framework of the heaviest timbers she has spaced at 2-foot intervals across the full span of the pit. Resting on the interior timber walls across these, she lays a tight deck of smaller poles. She strips young cottonwood trees along the creek, straight lengths of 2 to 3 inches in diameter, and over the pole deck she lays a thick bed of the compressed dried grass 6 inches deep. Over the grass she lays old canvas and salvaged burlap weighted at the edges, and then, and this is the part that brings Deke Calloway back to the fence line on a gray November afternoon to stare in actual bewilderment, she shovels a 1.5 feet of soil over the entire surface, then seeds it down with winter rye. She is growing a roof. Deke watches for a long time. He does not call out something about the absolute precision of her movements, the way she moves the soil with a particular efficiency, stops the laugh before it forms. He rides on. Without speaking that night at supper, he tells his brother about it, and his brother says, "Crazy foreigner," but Deke is not entirely sure anymore. What Marta has built is this: a structure that the cold cannot find. Cold travels in straight lines. It penetrates through surfaces. It enters where the outside connects to the inside. Marta has eliminated most of those connections. The earth around the walls does not conduct cold the way timber does. The grass between the double walls traps dead air, and dead air does not move, and air that does not move cannot carry cold from one surface to another. The soil roof above is 8 inches of thermal mass added to the 1.5 feet of packed earth, and that soil will hold the temperature it received in October all through January and February, releasing it slowly downward into the space below the animals themselves. 2 cows, 4 sheep generate heat. A cow at rest produces roughly the warmth of 400 candles in an enclosed, insulated space. That warmth has nowhere to go, nowhere, that is, except into the shelter that will need it. But the cost of all this work is not only physical, though the physical cost is real. Marta's hands by the 1st of November are cracked and bleeding from the combination of frozen air and constant contact with timber, stone, and frozen earth. She wears her dead husband's gloves, which are too large, and stuffs them with strips of wool cut from a blanket she can no longer afford to replace. She works from first light to last, which in early November gives her barely 9 hours of usable daylight, and she is back at it by lantern light in the evenings, when the children are asleep, cutting and fitting and packing insulation. By feel as much as sight, her $44 is shrinking. She spends $3 on additional clay pipe from the hardware in town, carrying it home in the wagon herself. She spends $6 on lumber she cannot salvage or substitute. She spends $2 on lamp oil she goes through at twice her normal rate. Because of the evening work, $33 left, then $30, then, when a critical timber splits during installation, and she must replace it. 26 on the morning of November 7th, she finds Borgström and 2 other neighbors, Paulson, who farms to the west, and a man named Kritz, who has no homestead, but involves himself in everyone else's, standing at her fence, having what is clearly an organized conversation. Borgström is doing the talking. He turns. When she approaches Mrs. Vasarhelyi, he says, with the tone of a man who has rehearsed this, "The community is of a mind to help you. What you're trying ain't gonna work, we know it. And if you're honest with yourself, you know it too. The Hoffmans have said they'd stable your cows for the winter. You can pay in spring when." "No," Marta says. "Now listen here." "No," she says it the same way both times, flat, final. She looks at him for a moment in silence, and then she turns and walks back to the ramp and goes back into the ground. Paulson looks at Kritz. She'll lose those animals, he says, mark my words. Kritz nods, already half enjoying it. There is one person, though, who does not stand at the fence. Anna Sorensdottir is 62 years old, Icelandic-born, a widow of 20 years, who lives in a small house at the north edge of town, and keeps to herself with a thoroughness that people interpret as unfriendliness, and is actually the quiet of someone who has already survived more than the talkers around her will ever face. She came to Montana from a country where the winters are measured in darkness and violence, and she has watched Marta's project from a distance with eyes that understand more than they reveal. She comes on the morning of November 9th, walking the 3/4 of a mile from town in the cold, carrying a cloth sack. Inside the sack are 2 pounds of tallow, 3 beeswax candles, and a jar of rendered goose fat. She sets the sack on the ground at the top of the ramp and looks down at what Marta has built. My father kept cattle in a turf house, she says, in Iceland, under the mountain. Marta looks up from where she is pressing dried grass into the wall cavity. She says, nothing waiting. Your drainage is good, Anna says. Your insulation is good. You are missing the heat trap. She says it the same way. Marta says, no, flat, certain, without decoration. The heat trap, as Anna explains it, while she climbs carefully down the ramp and runs her hands along the wall construction, is a small vestibule at the entrance. In the Icelandic tradition, you do not allow the barn's interior to connect directly to the outside. Every door is preceded by a small enclosed space, a buffer, a dead zone that captures the cold air that enters when the door opens and holds it prisoner before it reaches the animals. The warmth of the interior cannot rush out. The cold of the outside cannot rush in. The vestibule is the handshake between two temperatures, and it saves, Anna says, what her father calculated as nearly a third of the warmth that would otherwise be lost every time someone entered to feed the animals. Marta listens. Then she says, how big? 6 feet by 4 feet, 3 walls, 2 doors. The inner door opens only when the outer door is shut. I have the timber. Marta says, I will help you. Anna says, I have built one before. Together they begin. But on the second evening, when they hang the inner door, and Marta pulls it shut for the first time, something is wrong. A thin blade of cold air slides through the lower corner of the frame. The hinge has been set a 1/4 inch proud, and the door cants just enough to leave a gap the width of a finger. In January, that gap is a knife. Marta crouches and runs her bare hand along the bottom edge of the door. In the lantern light, feeling the cold seep through, and she does not speak for a long moment. We pull the hinge. Anna says it is 9 o'clock at night. It is 17 degrees outside. They pull the hinge, reset it, and rehang the door by lamplight, working in the close warmth of the vestibule frame. Their breath visible, their fingers numb by the time the screws bite properly, and the door swings true, and the gap disappears. Marta presses her palm flat against the door's seam and feels nothing. No cold, no air, nothing gets through. She and Anna look at each other in the lantern glow. Anna nods once. The next morning, the first time Marta steps through the completed double-door system and into the finished shelter, she stands still for a moment and simply listens. It is not silent exactly. The animals breathe. A cow shifts. There is the faint settle of the earth around them, the tick of cooling timbers, but the wind outside, which has been building since morning, a mean westerly that cuts through wool and skin without pausing, cannot be heard inside this room. It exists on the other side of 6 feet of insulated wall and 1.5 feet of soil, and it has nothing to say to the space that Marta has made. The temperature inside, by Marta's rough judgment, using the thermometer she keeps hung on the center post, is 38 degrees Fahrenheit outside. As she checks, before latching the outer vestibule door, it is 11 degrees, 27 degrees of difference, and the animals are just settling in. That is November 14th. The storm comes December 28th. She has 6 weeks. She uses every day of them. She stocks the interior of the shelter with enough hay for 60 days, more than she believes she will need, packed so tightly she has to move animals to one end to fill the other. She carries water in buckets and sets it in a low stone trough inside the space where it will not freeze, she brings in a 2-week supply of root vegetables for the sheep covered in straw. She runs a thin hemp line from the cabin to the top of the shelter entrance ramp, a guide rope, the kind her grandfather used in blizzard conditions, so a person walking 20 feet between buildings cannot become lost in a whiteout and she ties her best lantern shuttered and ready to a hook inside the vestibule. She teaches Ursabit, who is 9 and capable of careful instruction, how to enter the shelter, how to use the double door system, how to check the animal's water, and how to return to the cabin along the guide rope. If visibility drops to nothing, she does not tell her daughter this lesson, is because she worries she herself might not always be able to make the walk. She tells her it is because every person on a farm needs to know every job. Ursabit learns it in one morning. She is her mother's daughter for a few days in mid-December. The weather relents, going almost soft. Temperatures in the low 20s, thin winter sun, a false peace that the old-timers recognize and distrust. Marta uses the mildness to make a final check of every seam, every packed section, every timber she can reach. She brings in 2 more loads of hay on the wagon, stacking them just inside the entrance ramp. She is not comfortable exactly, but she is ready. Her neighbors are not thinking much about being ready. Borgström has added no insulation to his existing barn. He has a good structure, properly framed, tight boards, a reasonable design, and 19 winters in Montana have not broken it yet, and he sees no reason to change. Now the Calloway brothers winter their horses and their few cattle in a timber barn that is adequate for an average cold snap and marginal for anything worse. Paulson does not have a barn at all, properly speaking. A 3-sided windbreak with a tin roof, the kind of setup that works until it doesn't. On December 22nd, Borgström remarks to his wife that the cold seems different this year. He cannot say exactly how just different. She tells him to add wood to the fire. December 28th comes in at 11 in the morning, which is when the temperature drops so fast that the thermometer outside the Calloway barn moves visibly. Deke Calloway watches the mercury fall and stands for a moment in the cold without moving, and then he goes inside and tells his brother they need to put more hay in the barn right now. They are still hauling hay when the wind hits. It comes from the northwest, the direction Marta knows from her grandfather's descriptions, the direction that delivers the killing cold off the high Canadian plains. With nothing in its way for 300 miles, it hits Hardin at 47 miles per hour and keeps accelerating. By midnight, it is gusting to 61. The temperature, which was 11 degrees at noon, falls to -22 by dark. By the following morning, it is -38. It keeps going. The snow that comes with it is not soft and deep. It is horizontal, granular, more ice than flake, driven so hard it finds entry through seams and gaps that have kept out 10 Montana winters. Without complaint, it drives under doors. It packs into keyholes. Bergström's barn, tight as it has always been, develops a drift inside the northwest corner where the wind has found a seam he did not know about. His 2 draft horses stand with their backs to it, heads low, enduring. The Calloway brothers' cattle press to the south wall of their barn. In a mass, the animals' combined warmth creates a pocket of relative comfort on that side, perhaps -10, -15, while the north end of the barn falls to -25 and the water trough becomes a solid block of ice. The brothers are up through the night, shoveling, drift hauling water by firelight, trying to melt ice fast enough to keep the animals alive. They burn through a winter's wood in 3 days. Paulson's windbreak fails on the second night. The tin roof, never secured as it should have been, lifts in a 60-mile-per-hour gust and departs. It takes approximately 12 seconds for the space beneath to become ambient outside temperature, which is at that moment -41 degrees Fahrenheit. Paulson loses 2 of his 3 horses. Before morning, the third he leads into his house and stands in the kitchen. 2 people and 1 horse radiating heat at each other, which is not a solution, but is better than the alternative. Inside Marta Vasarhelyi's underground shelter on the morning of December 29th. the second day of the storm, when the temperature outside has fallen to -47 and is still falling. The thermometer on the center post reads 34 degrees Fahrenheit, 34 inside, -47 outside, 81 degrees of difference. The animals are calm. The two cows, Bana and Ferhea, stand with the particular peaceful patience of cattle that are not cold. Their breath is visible. The air inside is cool enough for that, but it is the light steam of an animal at ease, not the desperate heaving of one fighting hypothermia. The sheep have settled into a corner together, stacked like a living quilt, their collective warmth rising into the space above them, and trapped by the insulated ceiling 7 feet up. The hay is dry, the water in the stone trough is liquid, the lantern on the center hook burns steadily, no draft to stir its flame. The faint, sweet smell of warm cattle breath mingles with dry hay and packed earth, a smell Marta recognizes from her grandfather's stable 40 years and an ocean away, and it fills her chest with something that is not quite relief and not quite grief, and is perhaps both at once. Marta enters through the double vestibule on the morning of the 29th, shaking the ice from her coat, and stands in the lamplight and listens. Her face, going from the outside cold to the inside warmth, aches with the contrast. 34 degrees has never felt like warmth before. It does now. It feels like standing beside a fire. It feels like being alive. She checks the animals methodically, hooves, joints, eyes water. She forks fresh hay into the manger. She does what she came to do, and then she goes back through the double door and back up the ramp along the guide rope, because the snow outside is moving sideways, and the rope is not a precaution anymore. It is a necessity, and into the cabin where her children are alive, and her stove is burning, and the temperature inside her small human shelter is 51 degrees, which is not warm by any ordinary measure, but is warm enough, and she has enough wood, and she is not afraid. On the morning of the third day, December 31st, the temperature outside falls to -55 degrees Fahrenheit. It is the coldest recorded temperature in that county in 22 years of records. It holds through the night and into New Year's Day, a cold so profound that the trees in the creek bottom crack like rifle shots as their sap freezes and the wood ruptures. Marta can hear them from inside the cabin. She counts 6 separate cracks in the space of an hour each, one a small explosion in the dark. The temperature in her underground shelter on that coldest night drops to 29 degrees. The animals shiver slightly. She goes out at midnight, leaning hard on the guide rope, and adds 2 more forked loads of hay to give them additional bedding to burrow into. She cracks the inner vestibule door and stands in the buffer space for 5 minutes, listening. The cows are breathing, the sheep are breathing. No animal is in distress. 29 inside, -55 outside, 84 degrees of difference Fahrenheit. She goes back to the cabin and sleeps 4 hours and gets up and does it again at 4 in the morning. She does not know it yet, but Borgström has already lost his bay mare, found stiff in the northwest corner of his barn at midnight, frozen through in a way that makes no sense to him, because that corner has always been fine, always, but tonight it is not fine, and the mare is dead, and he is standing in the lantern light looking at her and understanding for the first time that 19 winters was not enough to teach him what he thought it taught him. The storm breaks on January 2nd, mid-afternoon. The wind drops first, suddenly like a door closing, and the temperature begins its slow crawl back toward something survivable. By evening, it is -30, which feels almost temperate by contrast. By the following morning, it is -19. Borgström comes on the morning of January 3rd. He does not come to the fence time. He walks all the way to the top of her ramp, wading through drifts that are chest-high in places, and he is breathing hard. When he gets there, he has his hat in his hands. He lost the bay mare 2 nights ago. He has not slept since he has come, though he would struggle to say exactly why. Some half-formed thought about checking on the widow, about helping her haul out whatever she has lost, about doing the decent thing after the arguing was over and the cold had settled. Who was right? He stops at the top of the ramp Marta is coming up it. From below, she is in her work coat carrying an empty water bucket, moving with the steady, unhurried purpose of a woman who has been checking on live animals. She looks at him, he looks at her. She is not wearing her heavy mittens. She has been inside, where she does not need them. Borgström opens his mouth and closes it again. He looks past her down the ramp to the vestibule door at the bottom. Even from up here, in the thin winter sun, he can see the faint shimmer of warmth rising from the entrance. The way heat moves through cold air. When cold loses your animals, he says, his voice is different than it has been all autumn. Smaller. They made it through. Come down, she says, see for yourself. He follows her down the ramp and through the outer vestibule door, and she holds the inner door for him, and he steps into the shelter, and he stops moving. Barna turns her broad head and regards him with the slow, incurious patience of a cow that has been warm and fed and undisturbed for 5 days. Fehea is at the hay manger. The sheep are heaped in their corner. Indifferent, the thermometer on the center post reads 31 degrees. His barn at this moment is -14. Borgström reaches out and presses his bare hand flat against the earth wall. He holds it there. The wall gives back a faint, impossible warmth. The stored heat of October held in place by 6 feet of insulated construction, and the slow generosity of the ground. His hand stays on the wall for a long time. By gum, he says quietly. His voice cracks on the second word just slightly. I thought sure we'd be digging grave today. Marta says nothing. There is nothing that needs to be said. She picks up her empty bucket and goes to the water trough, which is liquid, to fill it. Borgström stands in the warmth of the underground, his hat in his hands, and stares at the animals that are alive. The Calloway brothers come 3 days later, both of them, which means it is serious. Deke does the talking. He holds his hat and explains that they lost 4 head, not to freezing exactly, but to cold, stress, and the refusal to drink frozen water, and then to the cascade of problems that come from 3 days without adequate water intake. He asks if Marta would be willing to explain to him how she built the shelter. She takes him down the ramp and shows him the construction, explains the double wall and the dried grass, the drainage, the floor composition, the double-door vestibule. He asks questions that are surprisingly careful. He is not a stupid man. She has always known this, and she answers them with the patience of someone who has never cared whether people thought she was stupid, only whether the work was done. He asks how she knew about the vestibule. Anna Sorensdottir. She says. He nods, slowly absorbing this. Another woman he had not thought to ask. Before he leaves, he pauses at the top of the ramp. He turns back. How did you know the winter would be that bad? Marta looks up at the pale January sky. For a moment, the earth knows things before we do. She says the animals know things before the earth, and the old people remember things the animals cannot say. I tried to listen to all 3 at once. Deke Calloway nods. He puts his hat on. He walks back to his horse. Marta watches him go, and then she goes back down into the warmth that the earth has been holding for her, steady and patient below the killing cold of the surface world. Later, people will ask Marta to explain what she built, and she will do so willingly. Thermal mass, dead air insulation, drainage. The vestibule. She gives credit always to Anna Sorensdottir, who spent her remaining years as a quiet authority on cold weather construction, consulted by people who previously hadn't known she existed. She built her second underground shelter in 1901, larger and better drained. She helped Borgström redesign his barn that spring. She walked the Calloway brothers through their own vestibule and double-wall construction that summer and watched Deke pack dried grass between the frames with the care of a man who finally understood what he was doing and why she never charged for any of it. The knowledge is not mine, she said. When someone asked, I borrowed it from my grandfather, who borrowed it from his. You cannot charge for a loan. The winter of 1898 into 1899 killed 43 cattle, 11 horses, and 1 man. Crits caught in the open on the first day. In the county around Hardin, Marta Vasarhelyi's animals came through without a single loss. She paid off the banknote by April with the cream and the wool. the quiet daily output of animals that had survived, because a woman listened to the earth, remembered what the old people knew, and built something real before anyone else believed it. Was needed, she stands at the ramp, one more time hand, against the warm earth wall of the vestibule, the animals breathe steady, behind her the earth holds.